My name is Nancy Berlin, and I'm going to be talking to you about a couple of interrelated things: alternative economies, time banking, loan funds, and co-ops, all kind of wrapped together. And before I get into the details of that, I thought it might be helpful for me to tell you a little bit about myself and how I got to where I am, because we all get there differently. But I think given what you're all interested in, it might be a useful beginning. So I have a pretty long history in social services, community organizing. Yes. I pretty much started out my career in California working for the United Farm Workers Union, and have worked in a variety of community organizing campaigns. The most recent one, directing an organization to protect safety net programs, public safety net programs in California. But I always intersperse that with kind of direct social services, meeting needs in our communities. Worked for many, many years in homeless shelters and on Skid Row. And I find that very grounding, because I really get to see how people are struggling in their communities and then what problems we need to solve on the community organizing side, and I kind of go back and forth a lot. And in 2011, I got pretty sick and had to leave my community organizing job. And in the process of going through that, a lot of times that leads you to a place of reflection, deep reflection. And what it led me to was a lot of the community organizing I did was very transactional. And what I mean by that is that everything I did, there seemed to be something that somebody wanted back from me, and vice versa. And I just thought, you know, there has to be another way to do this. It just doesn't feel right. It feels like we should be, why isn't it that we see ourselves as a more interconnected community? We would say that a lot in our organizing, but it didn't seem to really happen all that often. And then I came to this other really stark realization, which is I did a lot of work organizing around the Affordable Care Act, and I did a lot of national organizing, and I knew people all over the country, and I did not know my neighbors' names. And I could not tell you who they were or what they did. And I had this terrible experience when my daughter was quite young, when we had a fire in our house, and we had to leave in the middle of the night, and not one person came out to help us. And so I thought, well, maybe that's just big city life. Maybe that's just the way it is. And I just thought, it just can't be that way. There has to be something else. So being in the age that we're in, the only way I could figure out how to approach this problem was to go on the internet and go to Google, and I typed in caring communities and wondered what would pop up. And one of the things that came up was this idea of time banking. And I'd never heard of a time bank, and I had no idea what that could be. And the next thing I found out is that there was one like a mile from my house, and that I had somehow missed in the last couple of years in its organization. So what I discovered was it's this community of people, and we do things for each other, but there's no money involved. And that the basic unit of exchange is time, because we all have the same amount of time in the day. We all have 24 hours. What we do with our 24 hours is what makes the difference, but that's what we have. It doesn't matter how much money you have, we still have 24 hours in the day. And so the idea behind time banking is that what you exchange is that amount of time that you have. And what that also means is it doesn't matter whether I'm taking care of your children or doing your taxes. If I take 1 hour to do it, I get 1 time credit for it. So it equals the playing field, or levels the playing field. It does, because it no longer matters how much money you have. And what I saw when I went to time bank meetings was that because of that, people were doing things for each other because they wanted to do them, and they were no longer asking what people did for a living. because that wasn't the important factor in our relationships anymore. It was the first time, I think, in my whole life I'd gone to any kind of meeting or social setting when the first thing out of someone's mouth wasn't, "What do you do for a living?" It was something else. It was like, you know, where do you live, or what's going on in your community, or what have you done for somebody lately? And so this was a whole different way of relating to people. And because of that, we do lots of different things for each other, and we have some basic rules around this, which if you study co-ops are very similar, and I can never remember them, so I'm going to read them to you. So the time banking core values are that we all have something to contribute, and that we all need each other. And so the basic thing here is we all have something that we can contribute to the community, and we all have needs to be met. And that's just a basic. That it works better when we work together as a two-way street. So when I do something for someone, it's always better if it's a more reciprocal relationship, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. And that we all need to be accountable to one another and are all part of the same interdependent community. And so the way that works in time banking, in the giving and receiving, is that we all may have things that we need, and we all may have things that we can contribute, but we probably can't find that all in one person. I was talking to someone about this the other day, about like, this is probably the biggest problem in personal relationships with anybody you're really close to, right? Like your partner, for instance, that we somehow have this idea that we're supposed to get everything from one other individual. But in time banking, we don't assume that. We assume that I might be able to do something for you, and you might be able to do something for you, and so on. So we pay it forward. And that way, it's not bartering, really. We don't have to meet everybody's needs. We just have to meet somebody's needs, and somebody has to help us meet ours. And so the way this works, like giving me as an example, is when I was still sick, I would ask people, I would put up an offer online, I'll show you in a minute, and I'd say, I need a ride to the doctor's office. And someone would show up at my house and take me to the doctor's office, and they would wait for me to make sure I was okay, and they would get back in the car and we would drive home. Well, I couldn't necessarily offer that to someone else, but I could then help somebody write their resume, which I did. And so I used some time credits for my ride, but I gained some from my writing, and then we bank them in an online account so you can always see where you're at. And so it allows people to, what we also find is it allows people to develop these relationships between one another that they wouldn't normally have. I suddenly found time bankers living on my same block, people who the month before I didn't even know who they were living like down the street. And in fact, one time I had this very funny experience where I said at a potluck, you know, where do you live? And this guy said, I live at the corner of Silver Ridge and Lakeview. And I said, no, I live at the corner of Silver Ridge and Lakeview. How could this be? So, so we begin to form these tighter relationships, and we do other things together. And sometimes we do big community projects together as well to help people in our neighborhoods. And we do everything from helping in community gardens to writing letters to people in prison, and anything you can think of, anything anyone wants to do, we can take it on and do it as a project. Out of this, when we talk to people about it, comes this very deep understanding that you know, there's a problem with the system that we live under now, and that for most of us, capitalism really isn't working very well, and it's not meeting people's needs, and it's not helping people to build community. And it's not helping us to think about the ways that we're connected to one another that don't have to do with money. And so while it's not the answer to everything, it does help us, because I just heard you talking about this when I came in, it does help us to shift our thinking about the way the world works. For instance, taking care of children or working in your home in a time bank is just as important as being a doctor or being an astrophysicist. In fact, it may be more important because more people have the need for childcare. And that's a huge need in our time banking community, so it's a more valuable service in many ways. And so it really shifts our way of thinking about what's important to us and what we value and how we express those values. And so on that level, it was, you know, it was a very deep shift for a lot of us to think about. The other thing is when you see our accounts, it's all an honor system. This came up just the other day. It's all an honor system, whether you log in your hours or don't log in your credits or how many credits you give. It's all, there's really no reason not to be honest about it, so people are pretty honest. But then sometimes someone will ask, well, what about somebody who just takes advantage of it and goes away in debt? Isn't there something you could, isn't that a problem? I mean, in fact, it almost never happens. I can only think of 2 examples, and they were all people who had extreme needs. And one was around childcare. It was a couple who just had a baby, and they couldn't really, one of them was unemployed, and they didn't have another way to get enough income together. But that person really, they both needed to be out working, and the only way they could do that was if someone looked after their baby, and but they had no money to do that. So that family went way in debt in their time bank account, and we all said, fine. We have, you know, because this is somebody who needs us in our community, and they're part of our community, and they're actually closer to us now because of that, and we know that they're going to stay in touch with us because of this relationship that we have. And so it also kind of rethinks our thinking about debt, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute because that's very important to how our loan fund works. Because being in debt in the time bank is actually not a problem. In fact, if you're too much in the credit side, it's a little bit more of a problem because it means that you're not finding a way to connect to your community enough. You're not reciprocating enough. You're only doing things for people, but you're not allowing people to give back to you. And it's important for people to give back in a reciprocal relationship. You really have to allow that to happen. So, and a lot of us have trouble with that. I have a little bit of trouble with that. It took some of us a lot of time to be able to say, I have things that I need, and I'm going to ask you for that help. So, I mean, that all sounds really wonderful, doesn't it? It sounds really, you know, and in many ways it is very wonderful, but there is a moment in every wonderful situation like that where you come to this point and say, yeah, but we still do need the money economy for certain things. There are certain things we can't do within this setting. I mean, in the 21st century, it just wouldn't work. And some of them we couldn't really do much about. We talked a lot about housing, and actually some of our folks do live in co-housing situations to try to meet some of those needs. But one thing that became clear pretty early on is we couldn't meet the need. A lot of this is around 2012, 13, in that 2014. A lot of our members were still were struggling a lot with employment. A lot of young people, in particular, were shut out of jobs and were therefore looking for other ways to make money on their own, and they were doing all kinds of things, and they were trying to start their own businesses, and they were anything they could to earn money. And some of them were actually pretty organized about it, and it had maybe even gotten a few people together and said, okay, we're going to do this together, we're going to do that together. But they didn't have any capital to do that with. They didn't have a rich uncle to loan them the money. They didn't have their own personal savings account. And they would go to the bank, and the bank would say, you must be kidding, I'm not going to loan money to you. And they were completely frozen out of that system. And we thought, well, is there any way we could do something about this? So kind of put that on hold for a second. There was a whole group of people kind of talking about this. In the meantime, in my quest for trying to figure out what the meaning of life was and what I was going to do for the rest of my life, I went to Spain, and I went to visit the Mondragon co-ops. Because I had also found them on the internet, and I thought that would be this is so interesting. What are they doing over there? And I found a group of people who were going, and I went. And so, you know, they're arguably the largest worker co-op in the world. And so it's not just who've been operating for decades. So it's not a small experiment they're running. It's like the real deal. And I was really interested going through their factories and talking with workers making refrigerators and stovetops and bicycles and all kinds of things. And and having created a pretty good quality of life in their communities. But the one thing that I was most impressed with the whole trip, that I kept saying over and over to myself, is that they created a bank. And I thought, and they talked about this. They talked about how to really be successful as worker co-ops, you needed the workplace, you needed the worker owners who do the actual work, but you also need a training component, because people need to be trained in the philosophy of this, but also need skills, particular skills. But you also need your own capital, because if you're going to expect, our regular banking society to loan us that money for our, that's not realistic. And so they, somewhere in their past, started this bank. And I came back to LA and I said, I want to start a bank, but I don't think I can start a bank. And somebody else said, well, no, that sounds really hard to start a bank, but we have these folks who just need a loan, like a small loan. Like, could we start a loan fund? And we thought, well, sure, why not? So that's what we did. I think it was just 4 of us got together and talked to a few other people and did some research. We looked at other loan funds. We talked to some attorneys who thought we were absolutely out of our minds. And we got one foundation to give us a small matching grant and said, why don't you crowdsource the rest? And we did. And we put up a site and we said, this is what it is. We're not asking you to loan us the money because we need capital to start with. We're asking you to give it to us. And we crowdsourced $10,000. So we now have a loan fund. And we've had a loan fund since about 2014. We had no idea, not one of us in this group had any experience in finances or banking, not individually or collectively. And there might have been experience in the time bank, but no one volunteered. So, so we had this money, and we knew we had people interested. And then we thought, well, where do we put this money? Because like putting it under the mattress didn't seem like a good idea, and just putting it in someone's personal bank account didn't seem like a good idea, although we considered that option. But one reason we really wanted it in an actual bank, aside from some of the safety issues around where it should go, is one of the things our members were telling us was the reason they couldn't get a loan from the bank is they had no credit rating or had a very bad credit rating. And so if we could set up a loan fund in a bank or working with a bank, then people could start to build back their credit by taking loans out from us. And so then we went on the search for a bank. And that turned out to be a really difficult search. And it took us all the way to Albuquerque, New Mexico, because we tried really every credit union we could think of in Los Angeles, and nobody would work with us. Even though we were completely guaranteeing every dollar. Like we were going to deposit the money in the account and just, we had the collateral, but they just absolutely would not work with us. So we found a bank. Through connections across the country, we found the Permaculture Credit Union in Albuquerque, New Mexico, that was doing loans, similar kinds of loans to farmers who brought their produce to farmers markets. So they understood what we were trying to do, and they said they would work with us. And we had a slight glitch a couple years later when they went under, but they were bought out by Sandia Credit Union, which agreed to honor the commitment. So that's where we still are. We would love to move that money back, but so far we haven't. And so we started and have remained small. We've given out 6 small loans as of Monday. They will all be paid back. And so we're about to go into a new round of borrowers. Our second loan was to a worker co-op. And at this point, so this would have been early 2014, at this point, very few of us, some of us knew about worker co-ops, but we didn't really know if there were any in Los Angeles. And so we were surprised when they sort of surfaced and they were within our own time bank. And that is the Pacific Electric worker co-op that does solar installations and other kinds of electrical work. And so they've been a huge inspiration to us because they not only borrowed money from us and paid it back, but were able to use the loan we gave them and the paying it back to get their next really big loan, which was exactly what we had hoped would happen. We don't think that we can fully capitalize anybody with loans between $500 and $5,000, but we are hoping that we can get those people to the next step. And in the process of that, we had to learn a lot of different things, and we had to go back to our own ideas about loaning money and borrowing money and all our values in the time bank and how that works with the banking world. And it forced us to face in the real world a lot of the preconceptions and biases we had about a lot of things. So for instance, one of them that came up right away is, well, don't we need to run a credit check? And we had a long discussion about it and said, no, we don't need to run a credit check. That's the whole point. You know, we're going to sit down, we're going to interview these folks, we're going to ask them for their business plans and some other documentation, we're going to ask them for references, but if we do a credit check, we're right back where we started from. They probably don't have good credit. They wouldn't be sitting here if they did. So instead, we're going to ask them to sign a promissory note. And that's one of these. And the promissory note, among other things, states, I understand the core values of time banking and as a vital community component, and promise to consider these values and what they ask of me as a vital member of this community. 1, that we are all assets. 2, that we value the efforts of others equally. 3, reciprocity. 4, commitment to community. And 5, respect for each other. And we tell people that, that this money is the community's money and we expect them to pay it back. And if they don't pay it back, they'll be beholden to the community, and the community will ask them what happened. That we won't report them to anybody, but we will have them sit down with us and say, what happened? And we had a couple people along the way who had a few problems, and that's exactly what happened. We sat down and we said, like one person, the bank called me and said, you know, this person didn't pay their loan, and I called him right up and I said, next time, talk to me first. Don't do that. You know, don't risk your credit rating. Come to me. I'm the loan coach, by the way. Come to me. Tell me what the problem is. Let's see if we can work it out. You know, we can call the bank. We can tell them, hey, you know, Joe's going to be 2 weeks late, but it's okay because you have our money, so don't worry about it. Don't report it to anybody. We've had lots of little things like that, but they've made a commitment to the community, so we don't do a credit check. When we sit down and review loans for application, we don't accept everybody. We've turned away a number of people who we didn't think were ready. But we didn't just say to them, sorry, no go. We said, how can we help you make this work? And we have, in addition to our questionnaire that people fill out if they want to ask for a loan, we have another questionnaire for mentors that says, would you like to be a mentor in our community loan program? You know, could you help somebody figure out their financials or write a business plan, or could you help them with a marketing plan, or whatever. And so we've had a couple people who've come in with financials that really made no sense. And we said, you know, this business is not going to work unless we can straighten this out, and we can't really loan you the money unless we think you're going to be successful. So let us match you up with somebody who can help you make this make sense. We did another where we said to someone, we really like what you're doing, but your marketing plan is so weak that we can't imagine that this will work. We have somebody who's really good at marketing, and we think they can help you. And so by doing that, all of our loans have been successful. Everybody has done what they set out to do and was able to pay them back. So again, it's small. It's certainly not the answer to every problem that we have, but it's a way to combine a lot of the different parts of our community and to weave our communities together in stronger ways. I was going to show you what this looks like. So this is the site for the time bank. It's called the Arroyo SECO network of time banks, and we're in a lot of different communities across the city, although not Santa Monica, because we have a sister time bank in Santa Monica. So you can see under here, so we have a whole bunch of projects, but this one is the Revolving Loan Fund, and so then it talks about how it works and the eligibility requirements, which are they look long, but they're pretty basic. The terms, the borrowing process, and how to apply. And it's also matched, there we are, with the local economy incubator, which helps with peer mentoring and classes and stuff like that. So I think I'm going to just stop there and hear what your reactions or questions that you have.
Is there a desire for the amount of capital to grow?
Yeah. So now we're feeling more comfortable with doing that. In the first couple of years, we're all volunteer. There is no paid person here, so that makes this a much slower process. And but we're just beginning to talk about, especially since we have all the money back now. We were really hoping to have it not quite happen that way and to have it more of a rolling thing, but it just happened that way because a couple people paid their loans back early. So yes, and we're looking at other ways to do that might not require us to take money from places we'd rather not take it from.
And this maybe is a stupid question, but is anyone profiting anywhere along the way?
Is anyone profiting?
Monetarily?
Is the fund, maybe the fund and not any personal?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Oh, well, so two things. So this is something we really struggled with. So in going to a bank, you have to meet the requirements of the bank, and the bank charges interest. And a lot of our members were really, really upset about this. And we said, there's nothing we can do about that. That's something we can't control. And if you think about it, the bank is charging us no fees for this, because this is a part I didn't mention, but because we do all the paperwork. We do all the screening, we do all the paperwork. Really, they're just writing checks. So it's not a lot of work for them, but they're not charging us any fees. What we tell people is that the fees are us. So I get time credits for being the loan coach. That's the fee. But it's a bank. The only thing they get is the interest. Our account gets a tiny bit of interest, but it's not a lot of money. So the interest doesn't amount to a whole bunch. So is that what you meant?
So you pay the interest, you cover the interest.
Correct.
For the credit union or the bank.
Oh, the interest that they charge. Well, so it's really complicated how this works. So in order for every borrower to be able to have their own credit, to get their own credit score and build credit, they have to open an account with the credit union. So there's basically a two-tier system happening here, right? So we have the time bank has an account with the credit union where we've deposited the $10,000 to $12,000, and each individual borrower has their own separate account. And so when we tell the bank, this person, we're loaning this person $2,500, then the bank takes $2,500 from our account and puts it in that person's account. And then that person, when they pay it back, the money comes back into our account. So, so the 6% interest is on their account, And we also get a smaller amount of interest just because we have a savings account. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The 6% is used to pay the bank,
Correct.
and then you get an interest on your savings,
Correct.
which increases your savings
Correct.
by like what, 0.01%?
Yes, almost nothing, right.
So is there, has there been any potential attempt by the bank to say, this is pretty neat, we like how this works, and what we're going to do is we're going to co-fund some larger...
No, that would have been nice. It's one reason why we'd like to move it here, though, because we think part of the reason for that is we have such a distant relationship with these folks. But if we could move it closer into Los Angeles, and I think we could do it now because we have a track record. I mean, really, when we first showed up, I think we looked like crazy people. So now we can show them that we actually did this, and then we could show them the local projects, and I do think that they might be more interested, and it would help us to do that. The Pacific Electric people, we did help them to get another loan by using our first loan and some other connections, but I think they might have gotten that one anyway because they're doing quite well. But yeah, we would love to have that happen. That would be great. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you give some examples of the type of businesses that
Yep.
you worked in?
Sure. Types of businesses. So the Pacific Electric is one. Our very first one was a woman who makes food products with a couple of other people out of a very small warehouse. And she was doing okay, but she really wanted to expand a little bit more, and she wanted to be able to sell more at farmers markets, but there were a lot of fees connected with the farmers markets that she couldn't cover. And she was from Africa, and she had never had a bank account in her whole life. She'd somehow gotten all the way to adulthood because she said, well, in my country, nobody had a bank account, and so I never had a bank account, and I came here and I was part of this immigrant community and nobody had a bank account, so I never had one either. But now, even though I'm renting a place and I have, I have work, I went to the bank. This is one of our big stories, and nobody will even give me $500. And so I believe we gave her $1,500, and she paid it back early because she knew exactly what she needed. She knew exactly how much she needed, and she quickly was able to get into 3 farmers markets and pay it back. So that was one. We had two women who, between the two of them, they had, I don't know, 3 or 4 children under the age of 4 when I showed up at the house. And they had started this small bakery business, and they'd done it because they were working, they wanted to be able to stay home, and they were trying to think, what can we do at home? And they first started baking things and then just selling them like at PTA meetings and stuff, and they got really good at this, and they found they could bake specialty things, like they could bake for kids with all kinds of allergies and that kind of stuff. But these are the people who had no marketing plan. They had no marketing plan, zero. They had no idea how to get past the PTA. And when I showed up at their house with the loan forms, it was just complete chaos in the kitchen, and we could think of all kinds of other things they could use. And the 3-year-old was like wiping off the table because they were very self-sufficient small children, I have to say, and because it was so sticky, I didn't want to put anything on it. And so we mostly paid for their marketing, because that was what we said. We think, obviously you know how to bake. Obviously you're not bothered by the chaos in your kitchen, so it's fine. But you need a bigger market. And so that was one. We have a woman who just paid hers off who had started this translating business, translating technical scientific materials. She started this business when things went really chaotic in her family, and she became the guardian of her younger sister and realized that she couldn't work outside the home, and thought, well, what do I know how to do? I know how to edit. I know people speak other languages. Maybe I could do this. I know about science. And and she needed to. She had been traveling a lot before that. She'd been doing a lot of work in places like Korea, and she realized she couldn't do that anymore. And so she was looking for help in building more of a market locally. So those are the ones that I can remember. So they're very different. And only one is a co-op. We talk a lot about co-ops with people. Some of these are so small, they're not really to that place yet. Yeah.
So one technical question, like you said that someone has to get an account with the credit union in New Mexico. So do they have to become New Mexico residents as well?
No.
Or okay, that's
No.
the credit union is open to everyone?
Yeah,
like, okay.
credit union's open to everyone. The form is really simple. It's, I think I brought it because people are always amazed. This is the whole form that they fill out. That's it. And really, you just fill out this side because that's if there's two of you. It's really simple. And even when on the second page it asks you all these questions about other credits and mortgages and stuff, they have to, it's their standard form, but they pay no attention to it. It's just they have to have it. And the only thing they really care about is that banking form that, I forgot what it's called, the one that says that you're not a terrorist. You have to go through some terrorist.
Oh, yeah.
That's the only one they really care about. The rest they don't care. So no, you don't have to be a resident. And you know, we had a tragedy. We had one of our borrowers die, which was tragic on a lot of levels. But one of the other advantages we found about going through an actual bank and not keeping it in our own personal accounts or under the mattress is banks are insured, and they have creditor insurance, which we might not have had. So that was interesting.
So do you only do business loans, or do you do other kind of loans?
We only do business loans. That was a very conscious decision because we couldn't, people have asked us that, like, well, could you do loans like for people who need help paying their rent or whatever? Well, there are two reasons why. One is we don't really know how anyone could prove that they could ever pay that back. And so we weren't sure how good we would, how responsible that would be to our community. When somebody has a business, presumably at some point they'll be bringing in some sort of money. But second, it just went along with what some of the other things we were working on, which is this idea of how do we make alternative or complementary economies work with the money economy we have, and what would that look like if you tried to make them, weave them together, and could we use some of our assets through time banking and our own exchanges to do this in a different way? So it made more sense for us to do business loans. Yeah.
Have you found any willingness of the different individuals to incorporate the time bank into their communities?
Yeah, yeah, we have. Some of them could do it more than others, but with the Pacific Electric people, especially in the early days, we did a lot of stuff together with them. And we did a lot of promotion. We helped them with a lot of promotion, and they used some of our services within the time bank. And lots of time bankers use Pacific Electric for their electrical work, and as a combination of time credits and federal dollars. And that was definitely true of the bakery too. Like all of us used the bakery a lot and promoted a lot, and they used us. They came to our events. Our farmers market person was forever bringing stuff to our potlucks for us to try out, and to try out recipes. And my husband did that once. That was a time bank exchange. Like, could you test these recipes, cook them in your own kitchen, tell us what's wrong? Do you like them? Do you think would anybody buy this? And so yeah, there's a lot of that kind of exchange that goes on. Yeah, really, it was great fun. I love that. And I forgot, but today, this brings us back to the co-op stuff too. So today we did an orientation in South LA with a group called Project Fair Chance that's working with formerly incarcerated people. And I had done 2 presentations to them about what we do and how we might work together. They've had a whole series of workshops to help develop worker co-ops in their communities. And one of the ideas that I brought to them is, well, time banking could work really well for your folks as a way to get more help into the budding co-ops you're trying to put together. And so they were really interested. It took a while to explain it and get them to buy into it. And today we did our first orientation to sign people up for the time bank, and it looks like we have like 7 or 8 people who signed up. So we're hoping that that'll be a whole other experiment of how that works together and helping to build the strength of those co-ops.
When I was with the LA Co-op Lab in May, we also did a couple workshops with the people at the Fair Chance Project.
Yeah.
Right.
And we, I think just a few weeks, and
Yeah.
there was a lot of interest.
There is, and they have some really good ideas, and we're very hopeful that that will take off. And there are a lot of other co-op projects beginning in LA, some of them you've heard of.
The home or the
I was sort of watching the permaculture credit union, because I heard of it some years ago. And I was wondering what happened. I went sort of sideways. I'd love to hear what happened with it. But setting that aside,
I have no
maybe
idea.
not for the group. You're looking, or you're hoping to start or take over an existing credit union in our area, maybe? Because I'm a member of a couple credit unions, and they're dismal.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, they're there for the members' benefit, but they're dismal.
It's kind of like the conversation I came in on, and like, you know, what's really a co-op and what isn't. No, we're not going to take over a credit union. We're not nearly big enough. But I do think if we could move to some more like-minded credit union in the area, we've talked to a few that are more interested in community development, for instance, in real community development. That would be a better fit for us, certainly.
Is there some potential, I'm just trying to understand the logic of it, is there a potential bridge to public banking?
Yeah, I think there is,
Okay.
down the line. Absolutely, I think there is.
Yeah.
We talk about it all the time. Yep.
We gotta start one. We gotta start.
We have to start one. Someone has to start it. Yeah, that's a long-term goal. I mean, time banking is a pretty community-based local development, and intentionally stays relatively small to keep us out of using a lot of money. And so that's why it's hard to make it meet all those goals, but we're hoping that it inspires people to do other bigger things beyond what we're able to do, certainly.
Can you explain just the how time banking on a local level and then public banking at a bigger level are connected? Like, one seems to not use money, the other one seems to rely still on money as some kind of social contract. So can you kind of explain, you know, besides just like, because people would be spurred by that idea, right?
Well, I think in some ways I think they're like two different approaches to the same problem that we face. So for time banking, the idea is, what would happen if we kind of removed ourselves from using money altogether? What could we do for each other that we all used to do for each other and didn't charge anything for? How could we reclaim some of that and see the value of that? But that's actually not incompatible with the idea of what would happen if we had banks that were really in the public interest and owned by the public and owned by us, because there are reasons to be able to put our resources together and move that capital around to do good in the world. And those are compatible ideas to us, yeah. And we need them both, but they're different. And you know, and I think we've struggled lately because when we first started doing time banking, people used to call it the sharing economy, and of course we can't do that anymore because that's been co-opted completely. But sometimes we call it the gift economy, because what we're trying to say is it's really about things that are outside of money altogether. But most of us completely acknowledge that we live in a world, we're way too far along in the history of humankind to do without any kind of unit of exchange. Yeah.
Well, like Philadelphia said, there's a time bank in Philadelphia that has its own script.
Yeah, there are several of those. There's one in Massachusetts.
Vermont.
Yeah, there's one in Vermont. There's one that's not used very much, but up in Northern California. And that's another approach to an alternative economy.
I think the best thing that I could see that has come from this is that it keeps the money in the community.
Yeah.
It's like the assets are not extracted from the community. They stay in the community.
Right, so I forgot to mention that in the list, when we evaluate a loan or a borrower application, we ask a lot of questions about what the business is and what the value is to the community. And we turned down one, I remember, where she just couldn't show that it was a benefit to anybody but herself. But when people can talk about it, not only just keeping the money locally, but that somehow they're doing something that returns some good to the community. With Pacific Electric, it was pretty easy. But even people who are just talking about their struggle to keep their families together and ways that the community could help with that, or wanting to support farmers markets is another part of alternative economies. And all of our borrowers have given back in other ways. They've all been on the next peer review committee to review others. They've all stepped in to help other borrowers with marketing plans and negotiations with banks and all that kind of stuff. So it's definitely one of the requirements. We would not give a loan to just any old person who walked in. And there's a requirement to be in good standing with the time bank, because that's our only bond. That's our credit check, right? So you have to be in the time bank for a certain period of time. You have to have made a certain number of exchanges so people know who you are and that you're really committed to us. Did you have a question?
Oh yeah, a bit earlier when you were talking about it being a gift economy. Have you read David Graeber's history of
Yes.
Where he basically talks about how barter never even existed and how he basically started out with gift economies.
Yeah, we all read David Graeber's book, and it's so interesting. So we all read that, and it's David Graeber. It's called Debt, right? It's called. Yeah.
First 100 years of debt.
No, it's like the first 5,000 years. It's really it's a very dense book. It's a very dense book. I read it with a group of people, and we had to divide up the chapters and to discuss it, and then divide up who would lead each chapter discussion, because particularly the middle of the book gets so dense that some of us couldn't get through it. But it's worth it. It's a really good book. So a lot of people in the time banking community there's a whole set of people who come out of a more back to the land sort of spiritual side, and they all read a book that I forgot the name of by Charles Eisenstein that's also about debt. And what's interesting is that these two books are written from entirely different mindsets, but they all talk about the same thing. They all talk about debt, the history of debt, the problem that comes out of capitalism and money economies. And so reading them both is a really fascinating experience of getting into two different minds.
What's the other book by Eisenstein?
Charles Eisenstein.
Another question about the details of the loans. So they basically the borrowers just have to pay back the amount they borrowed in a certain amount of time plus 6%.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And then if they don't, then they're in debt. And you guys have a sort of a process.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, we really haven't had to use it, but the process would be, so we set the time of the loan with each person, and we have some minimums and maximums in terms of a formula to figure that out. And people can vary it, but we don't want to make the amount they pay back so low that it never gets paid back. But we'll make it pretty low. I think somebody was paying off like $80 a month. It was sort of nice. It was pretty low. If we got to a place where somebody was defaulting on the loan, we would bring them in and talk about it. And ultimately, we have the collateral, so the bank would get paid and the community would lose the money. So our hope is that that would only happen if there was some very dire situation.
And do you have to negotiate each one with the credit union?
No, we set the limits and they just tell us, whatever we tell them, they just set it up that way.
Yeah.
Yep, because they have our money. They really have nothing to lose.
Well, that's the beauty of it.
I know. That's why we never understood why the first 15 credit unions we went to didn't want to do this. We couldn't see what the downside to this was.
So given that scenario, let's just say, I like to think of best case scenario, worst case scenario, and the more likely, most likely scenario. You fall into a worst case scenario where they default, company goes belly up for whatever reason. Now you started off looking at their financials, their marketing plan, and so forth and so on. Have you thought about each one of these potential, success or failure type of things? Is that if this one fails, we could actually take it over through a co-op. Have you ever even, do you look at that at the beginning? Do you think that later on down the road that would be some kind of conceptual thing you would say,
What we would do, hopefully we would hear that there was a problem before they went belly under altogether. And then what we would do is we would explore the options with them. And a co-op could be an option, or somebody else taking it over could be. We would try to figure out what the problem was. And so with the person who in the beginning defaulted several times, we tried to talk through what the problem was and how could that person solve. And they were stuck in a very common business program of not being able to calculate their cash flow very well. And so we just got people who had better understanding of that to step in and say, can we help you understand this better, because you really can't keep defaulting on your loan. But we haven't had anybody, I don't know what we would do, but I hope we would find out soon enough that we could negotiate something through with them. And yeah.
Do you know what the biggest hurdle is for becoming your own credit union, so that you're not like a middleman?
No.
I wonder.
No, I don't have a clue. It's a good question.
How are loan funds regulated? And what kind of, so I guess I'm also getting at what models did you look at,
So because we're not set up as a bank, we're not really regulated. And those were the models that we kind of looked at. So we saw others that really look more like credit unions or banks, and there's some big ones around the country. And we realized that we would never meet the basic criteria for that. None of us had any banking experience, none of us had any financial experience whatsoever. So that's why we finally came up with this model where really, we call it a loan fund because we're loaning out money, but the bank doesn't see it that way. The bank sees it as, we've deposited money here, and every now and then we transfer it here, and sometimes they transfer it back. And it's kind of like if you were running a business or even a nonprofit and you had different funds and you were just transferring the money back and forth. And that way we got around all the banking rules and all the loan rules. So for instance, some of you might know about the Working World, and they have a loan fund, and they of course are loaning much larger amounts of money, but they fall under this all the security and banking laws, and it's really complicated, and you need a much higher level of skill than I think we would.
Much more greasy and formative, and get that, and beat them.
Well, there's that, but there's also just knowing how to do it and working in that world, and one of the things that we've often even wondered a little about the working world, I don't really have the answer, is, I don't really know where some of that money comes from.
All right.
So, but we know, for better or worse, we know where every dollar of our money comes from.
So did you guys set up a nonprofit or anything?
We did. So we had to do that along the way. We realized that was a problem.
401c3.
So we set up a 501c3. Yep. But it doesn't, it's a structure that loosely holds a lot of different projects, including the loan fund, the time bank, and a couple of other smaller projects, yeah. And I can just tell you one thing we did there, just in case anyone's ever interested. When we went to become a 501c3 for the time bank, we also looked at other time banks around the country and discovered that a whole bunch of time banks had been turned down by the IRS for 501c3 status because they didn't look like charities, they looked like, or educational institutions, they looked like mutual benefit societies. And so some folks up in Oakland who run the Sustainable Economies Law Center asked us, since they knew we were interested, if we would be willing to work with them to write the model time bank application to the IRS. And we spent a really long time. I do this for a living. I help people with nonprofits. This is the most complicated and longest Form 1023 I think I've ever written because we answered every single question that we knew and problem we knew that they would ask us. And we wrote volumes about it. And then we put it up. It's open. It's source. Anybody can, it's up on our web. Anyone can copy and cut and paste from it.
And the Sustainable Economies Law Center is also just a great resource for anyone interested in cooperative law in general. They have very funny and cute presentations too about co-op laws on that website. So Sustainable Economies Law Center. And they're a nonprofit that's based in Oakland, California, and they do good talks. A lot of resources available for free. Like the Think Outside the Box manual that's on the table there, that's from them.
Yeah, they're great.
And did you hear back from the IRS?
Yeah, we got it. We did not one question. We got it. So it was worth doing. For the time bank. Mm-hmm. Yep. The big question was around the loan fund. Oh, so we had to write a lot about that. The lawyers were just like, oh my goodness, what are they going to think of the loan fund? So we had to build all the stuff around the educational aspects of it. And it was fine. We do all that. So.
Sort of question: Are you then acting as an umbrella group for like an incubator, like some of the other local nonprofits that are formally incubators? No,
we don't do that. Okay. But if there's a project that's kind of seems like-minded and would work well with us, I mean, it's very easy to become a member of the time bank, and so lots of groups become members to become kind of loose projects of ours, but we're not in a position to really incubate anything, I don't think, other than our own programs.
How do you expect the fund to grow, if at all? Like, how would you get more money if not by crowdsourcing? I
think we are going to go back to crowdsourcing. We're also exploring the model that that was used by the folks in Boston. Forgot the name of their co-op there. But we're exploring this idea that they did, which was to actually have individuals loan money and then crowdsource the loans and kind of then figure out how to redistribute that money. Yes, that's it, Ujima. It's a little bit more of a complicated model, and we're not sure if we're quite ready for that or how our folks would feel about it. It takes a lot more management to figure out whose money goes back where. So that's one way. We are going to go back to crowdsourcing because we already have the money we have, so if we were able to do it again, we could double it pretty easily. And we think we may have a couple of individuals who might be interested in either donating or loaning out larger amounts. Because that was the big problem at first. Nobody could figure out what this was and how it would work and if it would work at all. But now we have more of a track record.
And how not to make it too much of a Ponzi scheme where people are like shifting money around.
Right, that's exactly what we were trying to avoid. That didn't seem very useful or helpful for anyone.
And so, and then the other people who are involved, how did they get involved, and what's their background? Because you come from certain kind of organizing.
Right. Let's see. They're all different. We have one woman who's an artist. We have somebody who's a piano teacher. That's what I mean. Nobody really has any particular experience in this, so we all had to learn it together. Who else was in the original group? Yeah, nobody was.
But I think that's interesting too, because in the article that we read earlier today about S.E.C.O in Massachusetts, none of them had experience either in the composting sector, nor definitely not in finance.
Right.
Yet they had to come up with all these business plans to see the kind of activism that they wanted to see in the world come true. And like,
Yes.
would you agree that like activism is kind of changing, and you have to be not only just a loud voice and say things, but also be kind of technical? Like,
absolutely. I mean, there's a couple different good points you bring up around there that have certainly I've reflected on in my own activism, and one of them is rethinking our whole attitude about money. So a lot of us as activists have railed against money and corporations and all that, and I would still do that. But then you also have to think about, well, but there's also how to use that, and how do we want to use that to do the good things we want to do in the world. And that the deeper you get into any issue, the more technical it gets. And a lot of us, but none of it is impossible to learn. And so that's what got us moving in the beginning, when we all said, we don't know anything about this, but how hard could it be? Like, somebody's got to be able to understand this. And if we don't know it, someone else will tell us. And that's been true at every step along the way. The Sustainable Economies Law Center was great. Folks from other time banks helped us out. Lots of people can help us learn. We don't have to learn it ourselves. But yeah, we do need to be able to dig in. And some people are less willing to do that. And some people have, particularly around things like, I think because of some of where we come from in our activism, for instance, even worker co-ops are difficult, because you have to think of running a business, and it really is just running a business. So you have to think about, well, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to manage people, and what does it mean to look at supply and demand and cash flows, and what does it mean to read financial statements? But some of us, we realized we had those skills from other places, and we just need to say, well, I did it here, so maybe I can do it there. And I know certainly from my nonprofit experience, I realized that even though I didn't know anything about banking, I certainly had dealt with banks and read financials and knew how to make sense of them. And we knew other people who had small businesses had those skills. So yes.
You mentioned possibly reopening the loan
Yes.
program. Do you have a timeline for that?
Probably in the next couple of months. As I mentioned, we did have someone who died, and it really threw everybody quite a bit. And we're regrouping a little bit from that. But we're hoping now that we have so much money back in the fund, it's a perfect time to reopen it. I'm hoping early this fall. Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.